What if every human suddenly disappeared from Earth? Not died, not evacuated, not carried away by some visible catastrophe. Simply gone. Imagine one ordinary instant on an otherwise ordinary day. Somewhere it is morning, and a cup of coffee has just been placed beside a computer on the 52nd floor of an office tower. Somewhere else it is midnight, and a bedside lamp is still glowing. A surgeon has one hand raised above an operating table. A farmer is opening a gate. A pilot is watching a bank of instruments. A child has left a bicycle on a lawn. More than 8 billion separate lives are in motion. And then, in the same instant, every human being disappears. The planet does not notice in the way we would. Earth does not shudder. The moon does not change its orbit. The oceans keep moving under the pull of gravity. Wind continues crossing fields. Clouds continue assembling over warm water. The sun rises for people who are no longer there to see it. For a few seconds, much of human civilization behaves as though nothing has happened. Fans turn. Elevators move. Traffic signals change from green to yellow to red. Pumps push water through pipes. Computers exchange packets across fiber optic cables. Refrigerators hum in empty kitchens. Industrial robots repeat the movement they were programmed to perform. Automatic doors open for no one. Our civilization has momentum, and for a little while, momentum looks almost like life. Then the first failures begin. Cars whose drivers have vanished continue moving. Some modern vehicles slow automatically when sensors detect danger. Others remain in lane for a few seconds or minutes. Many simply leave the road, cross medians, strike barriers, buildings, other vehicles. On highways around the world, collisions begin almost at once. Trains behave differently. Many rail systems have automatic braking and signaling, and some urban lines are highly automated. A number of trains stop safely when systems detect that expected human input is missing. Others continue until safeguards intervene or power disappears. Ships under autopilot may hold course for hours or longer, moving through empty seas toward ports where nobody will answer them. Passenger aircraft already cruising under autopilot may remain remarkably stable for a time, but an autopilot is not an immortal pilot. Fuel runs down. Weather changes. Routes end. Eventually, every aircraft still aloft must come back to Earth somehow. There is no single cinematic moment when civilization collapses. There are millions of smaller ones. A kettle boils dry. A truck crosses an empty intersection. A machine in a factory waits for a part that will never arrive. A subway reaches a platform and opens its doors to no one. A dog scratches at an apartment door. And on the 52nd floor, the coffee begins to cool. The first great system to reveal how much civilization depends on continuous attention is electricity. Modern power grids contain immense amounts of automation, but they are not simple machines that can be switched on and then forgotten. Electricity has to be balanced continuously. Generation and demand must remain close enough that frequency and voltage stay within safe ranges. Automatic controls handle many disturbances in fractions of a second, yet human operators supervise the larger system, dispatch resources, respond to faults, coordinate maintenance, and restore equipment when something goes wrong. The disappearance of humanity creates something power engineers never designed for. Not one outage, not one storm, not one cyber attack, but the simultaneous loss of every operator, maintenance crew, fuel delivery, repair team, control room decision, and emergency response on Earth. At first, some grids may continue. Hydroelectric turbines spin. Solar farms produce power wherever daylight falls. Wind turbines turn where the wind is right. Nuclear reactors and fossil fuel stations continue operating according to their controls. Batteries charge and discharge. Automatic frequency regulation tries to keep generation and demand matched. But demand has changed violently. Millions of industrial loads have suddenly become unattended. Some continue drawing power. Some trip offline. cars crash into poles. Fires damage distribution lines. Generating units encounter conditions that would normally bring technicians running. Protective relays begin isolating faults. The grid fragments. One region loses a transmission line and separates from its neighbors. Another has too much generation for the remaining load and trips generators to protect equipment. Elsewhere, too little generation causes frequency to fall until more devices disconnect. Some islands of electricity may survive much longer than others, especially systems with autonomous controls and simple local generation. But once a large grid goes dark, bringing it back is not automatic. Black start procedures exist precisely because restoring a dead grid is a coordinated process, and there is nobody left to coordinate anything. So the darkness spreads, not everywhere at once. A city goes black while a hydroelectric valley beyond it remains lit. A solar-powered facility survives through the day and dies after batteries are exhausted. A remote telecommunications station continues blinking for another night. Emergency generators start in hospitals, data centers, airports, tunnels, chemical plants, and military facilities. Then their clocks begin. Fuel tanks are finite. Lubricants are finite. Filters clog. Cooling systems foul. Batteries degrade. Machines that appear autonomous are often autonomous only inside a world where humans quietly keep their supporting systems alive. Within hours to days, much of the planet's electrical civilization becomes dark. The view from orbit changes before the planet itself has changed much at all. The familiar constellations of city light begin going out. Coastlines that once glowed at night become difficult to distinguish. Highways vanish into darkness. Fishing fleets no longer shine offshore. Oil fields stop burning with organized patterns of artificial light. The bright web that humans stretched across the continents starts breaking into isolated sparks. A few sparks may last surprisingly long. Then they, too, disappear, and night becomes dark in places that have not experienced true darkness for generations. The loss of electricity causes the next systems to follow. Water does not simply arrive in upper-story apartments because gravity wishes it to. In many cities, it is pumped, treated, lifted, pressurized, monitored, and pumped again. When electricity fails, reservoirs and elevated tanks can preserve pressure temporarily. Gravity-fed systems may work longer, but pumps stop. Treatment plants stop. Valves remain wherever they happen to be. Sewage lift stations fail. Storm water systems lose powered components. Taps go dry in towers. Sewers begin behaving like neglected rivers underground. In low-lying subway systems, the change is more dramatic. Groundwater has always wanted to enter tunnels. Rainwater has always found cracks. Cities keep many underground spaces dry only because pumps quietly remove water every day. When those pumps stop, the water is not invading a place that naturally belongs to us. It is simply returning to the lowest available space. At first there are puddles, then standing water. Then whole sections of tunnel become inaccessible even if someone were there to enter them. The same thing happens inside basements, utility vaults, underground parking structures, and deep foundations. Water is patient. Human engineering spends enormous effort persuading it to go somewhere else. Without us, the persuasion ends. But one category of infrastructure does not simply become quiet when its operators vanish. Nuclear power stations deserve a more careful story than popular imagination usually gives them. When serious abnormal conditions occur, operating reactors are designed to shut down their chain reactions rapidly. Control rods insert. Reactors scram. Fission power falls dramatically. But a shut-down reactor is not instantly cold. Radioactive decay inside fuel continues producing heat. Spent fuel stored in pools also generates decay heat. Modern plants have multiple layers of emergency equipment, backup power, water supplies, procedures, and, in some designs, passive safety features intended to keep fuel covered and cooled during severe events. Those systems buy time. In our imagined world, time is exactly what they cannot ultimately buy enough of, because no human will ever arrive. Diesel generators can run only while fuel and machinery remain available. Batteries last only so long. Pumps can fail. Water can evaporate or leak. Different reactor designs, fuel ages, pool configurations, weather conditions, and passive systems would produce very different outcomes. Some sites might reach stable states without major release. Others could eventually lose cooling and suffer severe fuel damage. Spent fuel pools at certain facilities could become a particular concern if water were lost while sufficiently hot fuel remained inside. So there would not be one worldwide nuclear explosion. There would not be every reactor detonating at midnight. There would be a scattered, uneven map of industrial emergencies unfolding over days, weeks, and perhaps longer. At some sites, containment structures would limit releases. At others, fires, hydrogen, damaged fuel, or breached systems could contaminate surrounding regions. Winds would carry material. Rain would wash it into soil and water. The world without humans would not immediately become clean. For a while, it would become messy. Refineries shut down badly. Chemical storage tanks corrode. Pipelines lose pressure control. Mines fill with water that may carry acids and metals. Tailings ponds remain behind earthen walls that no engineer will ever inspect again. Warehouses contain pesticides, solvents, fuels, chlorine compounds, fertilizers, and substances whose labels have suddenly become meaningless because there is nobody left to read them. Some industrial systems fail safe. Some simply fail. Fires begin in places where the first crashes occurred and in places where unattended processes run beyond their intended conditions. There are no fire departments. No one cuts electricity to a damaged block. No one closes a valve because smoke is coming from the wrong vent. Yet even these fires have limits. They consume available fuel. Rain falls. Fire breaks exist accidentally in concrete and open ground. A city may burn badly in one district and remain almost untouched in another. The entire world does not become one continuous inferno. That distinction matters throughout this story. Without humans, almost nothing happens everywhere in the same way. Earth is too varied for that. One abandoned house will stand for centuries in a dry desert climate. Another will rot quickly in a wet forest. One bridge may survive far beyond its design life because conditions happen to remain gentle. Another may lose a critical bearing or scour around a foundation during the first great flood after maintenance ends. There is no universal clock, only tendencies. And the first tendency is that the systems requiring the most continuous attention fail first. For animals living inside our world, that first week is not peaceful. The disappearance of humans removes hunting, traffic, habitat destruction, noise, light, fences maintained by people, and many other pressures. But it also removes feeding, watering, shelter, veterinary care, doors being opened, barns being ventilated, pumps filling troughs, and hands that have shaped certain species for thousands of years. Pets inside locked homes face an immediate problem. A cat with access to the outdoors may be able to hunt. A healthy dog able to escape may scavenge and later join other dogs. But an animal trapped in a high-rise apartment has no evolutionary adaptation for opening the front door. Aquarium fish depend on pumps and heaters. Many caged birds cannot leave their cages. Reptiles in climate-controlled enclosures lose heat or cooling. On farms, the scale is far larger. Animals in open pasture may survive if water is naturally available. Horses, goats, pigs, some cattle, and many hardy breeds could establish feral populations in suitable landscapes. Pigs in particular are extraordinarily adaptable. Other breeds have bodies so strongly shaped by artificial selection that survival, without human care would be difficult. Confined livestock face the worst conditions. Automatic feeders and waterers may function briefly. Ventilation may continue until electricity fails. Then the machines stop. This is one of the least romantic parts of imagining nature without us. For the first days, human absence is not liberation for every living thing. It is disruption. Zoos and large aquariums make that contradiction especially visible. Popular versions of this scenario sometimes imagine lions, elephants, bears, and apes immediately walking out through open gates. Most would not. Modern animal facilities are built precisely to keep animals and people separated, often with several barriers between an enclosure and the outside world. When the keepers disappear, the barriers remain. For some animals, that means the enclosure becomes a trap. A large herbivore in an outdoor habitat may have vegetation for a while, but whether it survives depends on access to reliable water, seasonal climate, group size, and how long stored food or automated systems continue. A carnivore may have strength enough to damage parts of an enclosure, but strength is not the same as having an obvious path through layers of doors, fences, walls, and service corridors. Some animals could escape surprisingly early because a gate happened to be open when humans vanished. Others could remain confined long after food deliveries stop. Aquariums are even more dependent on invisible machinery. A giant tank can look like a self-contained piece of ocean, but pumps circulate water, filters remove waste, systems maintain temperature and chemistry, and aeration keeps enough oxygen available for densely stocked animals. Once power and backup systems fail, conditions begin changing. Different tanks would fail at different speeds. A cold water exhibit in a cool building is not the same problem as a tropical reef tank in summer. But many captive aquatic animals would be living inside ecosystems whose essential currents were actually machines. Then there are species that exist only because people are actively keeping them alive. Some endangered animals survive in breeding programs specifically because their wild populations are tiny or gone from parts of their former range. Human disappearance would remove poaching and habitat destruction, but it would also remove veterinary care, carefully managed breeding, predator control, supplemental feeding, and the movement of individuals between institutions to preserve genetic diversity. For a few species, the last protected population could disappear inside a world that was becoming less human at exactly the same time. Years later, damaged fences and corroded gates would create a different possibility. Some surviving zoo animals might enter surrounding landscapes. Whether they establish populations would depend less on how dramatic they look behind glass and more on ordinary ecological questions. Is the climate suitable? Is there enough food? Are there several breeding animals rather than one isolated survivor? Are there diseases or predators they cannot handle? Can they reproduce without assistance? A species from a similar climate might find an unexpected second life outside an abandoned city. A tropical specialist released into a cold northern winter might not. So even the zoo does not open into one spectacular stampede. It fragments into hundreds of separate stories. Some end quickly. A few may continue for generations. And the strange thing is how quickly that disruption begins turning into something else. At the edges of towns, deer notice the silence. Birds encounter streets without moving vehicles. Predators cross roads that once behaved like dangerous rivers. At night, there are no headlights. There are no lawn mowers, chainsaws, aircraft approaching airports, construction crews, sirens, music from open windows, or distant highways producing their continuous low roar. The soundscape changes before the skyline does. Wind becomes easier to hear. Rain becomes louder. Frogs calling from a drainage pond no longer compete with traffic. And somewhere in the office tower, beside the dark computer, the abandoned cup of coffee has become cold. The cup is still there. The city around it is already beginning to disappear. By the end of the first week, food begins changing the ecology of human spaces. Supermarkets are full of calories that no longer have owners. Refrigerated aisles warmed when the power failed. Freezers thawed. Fruit softened. Bread molded. Meat spoiled. In warehouses and distribution centers, enormous quantities of food sit behind walls that may remain closed for weeks or months. For scavengers able to reach it, this is a temporary feast. Rats, mice, flies, cockroaches, gulls, crows, foxes, raccoons, feral dogs, and countless microorganisms exploit what they can. But the feast contains a trap. Many species that appear perfectly wild in cities have become dependent on the continuous production of human waste. Restaurants no longer fill dumpsters. Grain no longer arrives at ports. Garbage bags no longer appear on sidewalks each evening. So some urban animal populations might rise briefly and then crash. The city rat, which seemed inseparable from civilization, discovers that civilization was feeding it. Other species gain far more than they lose. Road mortality nearly disappears. Hunting ends. Fishing pressure collapses. Logging stops. Agricultural expansion stops. Night lighting fades. Noise pollution falls sharply. Fences begin breaking. Shipping slows and then ceases. The absence of humans removes one ecological pressure after another, but not in a clean sequence. For a while, the world contains both the ruins of our pressures and the freedom created by their disappearance. The first spring is especially revealing. Fields that were supposed to be planted are not planted. Fields that were planted before humanity vanished are not harvested. Corn, wheat, rice, soybeans, potatoes, cotton, orchards, vineyards, and vegetables continue according to biology rather than economics. Some crops produce one final extraordinary harvest that nobody gathers. Others fail quickly without irrigation, pesticides, pruning, harvesting, or protection from competing plants. Modern crops are not necessarily helpless. They are living organisms with deep evolutionary histories. But many have been selected for qualities useful to us rather than qualities useful in a wild ecosystem. Large fruit. Seeds that stay attached rather than scatter efficiently. Synchronized ripening. Reduced defenses or dependence on managed water and soil. The neatly organized agricultural landscape begins losing its geometry. Weeds enter rows. Volunteer crops grow where seeds fell the previous season. Shrubs invade margins. Wind carries seeds from hedgerows. Burrowing animals disturb irrigation channels. Trees begin colonizing abandoned pasture in climates where forests can return. But not every farm becomes a forest. Grasslands remain grasslands where climate, fire, and grazing favor them. Dry cropland may become scrub. Irrigated deserts may return toward desert when canals fail. Tropical plantations can transform into dense secondary vegetation. High-latitude fields may become woodland slowly. Wetlands may reappear where drainage pumps stop. Nature does not have one preferred picture of what land should look like. It responds to water, temperature, soil, fire, seed sources, herbivores, storms, and chance. That means the phrase nature reclaims the city is useful, but incomplete. There is no single nature waiting outside a fence. There are millions of organisms negotiating the newly available space. Consider a suburban lawn. For decades it may have been cut every week, watered, fertilized, aerated, treated against insects, edged beside pavement, and cleared of fallen leaves. The grass itself may have been a carefully chosen mixture of species maintained in a state that almost never exists without human work. The mower does not return. Within weeks the grass grows high. Flowering plants that were previously cut before reproducing produce seeds. Dandelions and clover spread. Insects use stems that would normally have been removed. Mice create paths. Birds forage in cover that did not exist before. After a few years, shrubs establish if the climate allows. Saplings appear. Shade begins changing which plants can survive below them. The lawn becomes meadow, scrub, young woodland, or something entirely different depending on place. The transformation feels fast because mowing hid how much biological pressure was always pushing in another direction. Cities reveal the same thing at larger scale. A sidewalk crack that was once repaired annually becomes a seedbed. Dust collects in it. Moss holds moisture. A grass root enters. Freeze and thaw widen the opening. A sapling establishes where its roots can reach damp soil below the pavement. The root does not split a perfect slab by brute strength overnight. It uses weakness that water, temperature, and time have already created. Water is still doing most of the work. On roofs, gutters clog with leaves. Drain openings block. Puddles remain after storms. Membranes that were designed to shed water begin aging under sunlight, ice, wind, and standing moisture. Once water enters a building envelope, it finds insulation, wood, drywall, electrical conduits, steel connections, concrete pours, and every small construction defect that maintenance once prevented from becoming a large one. A broken window matters enormously. Perhaps it breaks when a bird strikes it. Perhaps wind-driven debris hits it during a storm. Perhaps thermal stress cracks the glass. Once a window is open, rain can enter, birds can nest, leaves accumulate, seeds arrive. Freeze-thaw cycles operate inside what was once climate-controlled space. The building becomes part of the weather. Wood swells and rots. Fasteners corrode. Mold spreads. Floor coverings hold water. Ceilings collapse. Concrete slowly carbonates. Steel reinforcement rusts where water and oxygen can reach it, expanding and breaking surrounding concrete. Exterior sealants fail. Facade panels loosen. Skyscrapers do not all fall after 10 years. That would be too simple. They age unevenly. A well-drained steel tower in a relatively dry climate may remain recognizable for a very long time. A coastal building exposed to salt, hurricanes, and water intrusion may degrade much faster. Some towers lose glass long before they lose their frames. Some low buildings collapse sooner than tall ones because timber roofs fail and water enters everything below. Human cities become gigantic experiments in materials science with no one left to record the results. The first major storms after our disappearance accelerate the experiment. A hurricane arrives at a coast where no shutters were installed and no evacuation was necessary because nobody is there to evacuate. Windows break. Roof coverings peel away. Storm surge crosses roads and fills basements. Salt water enters electrical equipment that will never be replaced. Fallen trees block streets forever, which matters less now that streets serve nobody. A winter freeze bursts pipes in buildings where heating has failed. Water leaks until system pressure disappears. Ice wedges into masonry. Snow loads roofs that no crew will clear. An earthquake shakes a city and leaves damaged structures standing at angles that would once have led to immediate closure and demolition. Now they simply wait for gravity and weather to finish the work. A wildfire enters an abandoned suburb. No one waters lawns. No one clears vegetation from power lines. But there are also no people starting most accidental fires, no cars throwing sparks, no electrical grid staying energized indefinitely, and eventually fewer functioning industrial ignition sources. Fire regimes change in complicated ways. In some landscapes, suppression ending allows fires to return more naturally. In others, decades of accumulated fuel create intense burns. Again, the world without us is not automatically calmer. It is less managed. Those are different things. Rivers make that lesson especially clear. Human beings have built dams of almost every scale, from small farm ponds to concrete walls holding back reservoirs that reshape entire valleys. Many are inspected, repaired, dredged, operated, monitored, and adjusted continually. Others are largely passive structures that can function for long periods with limited intervention. When people vanish, a dam does not understand that maintenance has ended. Water continues arriving. Sediment continues arriving. Floods continue arriving. Spillways continue eroding. Concrete continues cracking. Metal gates continue corroding. Trees continue growing on earthen embankments. Burrowing animals continue opening pathways through soil. Extreme storms test structures again and again. Some small dams fail relatively early. Perhaps an outlet clogs. Perhaps overtopping cuts into an earthen embankment. Perhaps a spillway erodes during a flood. When failure comes, the reservoir is suddenly converted back into moving water. A pulse of sediment travels downstream. Former lake bottom becomes mudflat, then meadow, wetland, forest, or channel. Large concrete dams may persist far longer, especially where spillways can pass floods without active control. But even the most impressive wall is not outside geology. Foundations weather. Reservoir sediment accumulates. Earthquakes happen. Exceptional floods come eventually. There is a beautiful irony here. For centuries, humans forced rivers to wait behind walls. Without us, many rivers begin waiting for the walls instead. One by one, over decades, centuries, and in some cases perhaps longer, barriers fail or are bypassed. Rivers cut new channels around them. Sediment once trapped upstream moves toward floodplains and coasts. Fish encounter old migration routes again, where surviving populations can reach them. The change is not universally beneficial. Reservoirs themselves became ecosystems. Some wetlands formed around them. Some downstream habitats adapted to the altered flow. When a dam fails suddenly, the disturbance can be enormous. The important point is not that every river returns to a pristine condition. There is no rewind button. The river moves forward from whatever state humanity left it in. That principle applies to wildlife as well. It is tempting to imagine that once people vanish, endangered species immediately recover everywhere. Some probably would recover dramatically if their main threats were hunting, roads, deforestation, disturbance, bycatch, or direct persecution. We have partial real-world hints of this. Places where human activity has fallen sharply can support abundant populations of large mammals, even when those places contain other hazards. The Chernobyl exclusion zone is often used as an example, though the lesson is more nuanced than the simple claim that radiation is harmless or that nature prefers nuclear accidents. Studies have found abundant large mammals in the zone, while other research documents biological damage associated with radiation exposure in particular organisms and places. The cleaner lesson is this: removing intense human pressure can matter enormously, but it does not erase every other stressor. Our empty Earth would magnify that lesson globally. Elephants would no longer be killed for ivory. Rhinos would no longer be poached for horn. Whales would no longer be struck by ships or entangled in newly deployed fishing gear. Sea turtles would encounter beaches without hotels, vehicles, umbrellas, and artificial lighting. But some endangered species survive today only because humans actively protect them. A tiny population kept alive by captive breeding would lose its keepers. An island bird protected by continuous removal of invasive predators might suddenly face those predators without assistance. A plant existing in a botanical garden but gone from the wild might disappear when irrigation stops. Species dependent on controlled burns, artificial nest sites, vaccination, supplemental feeding, or fenced reserves could decline. Humanity has become both threat and caretaker. Erase us completely, and both roles vanish together. The ocean experiences the same contradiction. Industrial fishing stops almost instantly. No new nets enter the water. Trawlers no longer scrape seabeds. Longlines stop catching animals that were never their intended targets. Ship noise collapses. Whale strike risk falls. Coastal development ceases. Fish populations that still have enough breeding adults may expand. Large predators may recover slowly. Some marine ecosystems could become more structurally complex over decades. But the ocean does not forget what happened before the final boat stopped. Carbon dioxide already dissolved in seawater remains part of ocean chemistry. Plastics already floating or buried in sediment remain. Persistent pollutants remain. Lost fishing gear continues ghost fishing until it degrades or becomes buried. Extinct species do not return because the boats went home. And the climate does not snap back either. This is one of the most important corrections to the comforting version of our story. When human emissions stop, atmospheric chemistry begins changing immediately, but different pollutants behave on radically different timescales. Short-lived air pollutants fall quickly. The haze associated with some industrial activity clears on timescales of days to weeks. That improves air quality, but it can also remove aerosols that had been reflecting some sunlight and temporarily masking part of greenhouse warming. Methane declines much faster than carbon dioxide over the following decades because atmospheric chemistry destroys it on a relatively short timescale. Carbon dioxide is different. There is no single atmospheric lifetime for a pulse of CO2. Some is taken up by plants and the ocean relatively quickly. Some remains involved in the carbon climate system for centuries to millennia and beyond. The oceans continue redistributing heat. Ice sheets respond slowly. Sea level can continue changing long after emissions cease. So the first human-free century is not a return to the climate of 1800. It is a new climate trajectory beginning from the world we actually created. That matters because our disappearance happens after our influence, not before it. The atmosphere carries memory. So do the oceans. So do forests cleared centuries ago, soils eroded by agriculture, rivers moved into new channels, species transported across continents, and extinctions that can never be reversed. The world after humans is not the world before humans. It is the world after us. That difference will become more visible with every passing year. A year passes. The word year has no official meaning anymore because there are no calendars being updated, no schools beginning terms, no tax deadlines, no birthdays. Yet Earth still completes its orbit and seasons still return. The first anniversary of human disappearance arrives without ceremony. By then, the office tower with the coffee cup has spent a full cycle without heating, cooling, cleaning, inspection, or repair. The cup itself looks almost unchanged. Ceramic is patient in a different way from water. The coffee is gone to mold and evaporation. Dust has settled across the desk. The computer screen is dark. Somewhere on the floor, a ceiling tile has fallen after a leak developed near an air conditioning duct. A pigeon has entered through broken glass on another level and built a nest where a conference room used to be. Outside, the city is still unmistakably a city. Most towers stand. Most roads remain roads. Most bridges remain bridges. The skyline has not dissolved into forest after 12 months. But almost every surface now carries evidence that the maintenance era ended. Traffic lanes are hidden beneath abandoned vehicles. Many tires are flat. Steel brake discs are orange with rust. Batteries are dead. Paint fades. Windshields are filmed with dust and organic growth. Cars that crash during the first minutes remain exactly where momentum placed them unless floodwater, fire, falling debris, or animals have moved them. The streets are quieter but not empty. Animals have learned quickly which barriers no longer matter. Deer enter neighborhoods more confidently. Coyotes, jackals, foxes, wild boar, macaques, bears, leopards, hyenas, or other adaptable species expand into nearby human spaces depending on continent and region. There is no universal urban successor because there was never one universal city ecology. In North America, a suburban street might become part of a deer and coyote range. In parts of Europe, wild boar may roam through empty towns. In South Asia, Macaques accustomed to people may initially struggle when handouts disappear, then redistribute toward foods they can actually obtain. In African cities bordering wild habitat, animals once discouraged by fences, traffic, and people may move through districts that have been inaccessible for generations. In Australia, kangaroos and wallabies may enter open urban ground, while feral cats and foxes continue exerting heavy pressure on native wildlife. Human absence does not erase invasive species. In fact, some of our biological introductions become among our longest-lasting legacies. Rats remain on islands where sailors carried them. Cats continue hunting far from the houses in which their ancestors were pets. Rabbits reshape vegetation. Feral pigs dig into soil. Horses form bands. Goats climb through landscapes where they were never native. Plants carried as crops, ornamentals, or weeds continue competing with species that evolved without them. The biological map humanity created outlives humanity immediately. There will never again be a world in which the American continents have never seen horses after their reintroduction by humans, or Australia has never encountered European rabbits, or isolated islands have never received rats. Evolution must work with the pieces now on the board. Domestic dogs offer one of the most interesting examples. There is no reason to expect them simply to become wolves again. Evolution does not reverse toward an earlier model. It selects among whatever variation survives under current conditions. Large, healthy, behaviorally flexible dogs with access to food and water may do well in some environments. Extremely specialized breeds may struggle. Over generations, natural selection favors animals able to reproduce without veterinary assistance, tolerate local climate, avoid disease, find food, raise young, and interact successfully with competitors. Their descendants could become populations unlike both household dogs and wolves. Human preference no longer decides which faces, colors, sizes, or temperaments reproduce. Weather does. Disease does. Hunger does. Competition does. The same transformation begins in cattle, pigs, horses, chickens, goats, sheep, pigeons, and every other species whose recent evolution has been tied closely to us. Some disappear from large parts of the world. Some flourish. Some become wild in ways their domestic ancestors never were. Chickens are a particularly strange legacy. Humans raise them in numbers so enormous that their bones have become one of the potential biological signatures of our era. Most industrial birds confined, when people vanish, do not survive. Yet chickens already exist in free-ranging and feral populations, and some lineages could persist where predators and climate allow. Imagine a future biologist, if one ever evolved, studying a fossil layer filled with the bones of one small bird found on every inhabited continent. They might correctly infer that something extraordinary happened here. The disappearance of human food does something equally dramatic to insects. Houseflies lose the continuous streams of waste created by cities and livestock facilities. Cockroaches adapted to heated buildings confront winters without heating in colder climates. Bedbugs lose their host almost completely in one instant. Human lice face an even more direct extinction crisis because their habitat has vanished with us. Mosquitoes are different. Most mosquito species were never dependent on humans. Some that specialize in human environments may decline, while wet basements, clogged drains, abandoned pools, neglected containers, and changing wetlands create temporary breeding habitat for others. Our disappearance does not mean insects disappear from cities. It means cities stop selecting insects for their relationship with us. And the same is true for microbes. Pathogens specialized entirely on humans lose their ecological world. Viruses that require continual person-to-person transmission simply stop finding new hosts. Diseases with animal reservoirs remain. Bacteria in water, soil, animals, and decaying organic matter continue as they did long before hospitals existed. One of the strangest consequences of human extinction would be the extinction, or near extinction, of organisms whose evolutionary success depended completely on living in and on us. The world loses humans, and with us, it loses entire tiny ecosystems. Inside abandoned hospitals, another kind of ecology begins. Sterile rooms stop being sterile. Air filters stop. Humidity changes. Refrigerated medicines warm. Freezers containing research samples thaw when backup systems fail. Cell cultures die. Frozen embryos and tissue collections are lost unless some unusually durable cryogenic system remains cold much longer than expected. Humanity's biological archives disappear quietly. The physical libraries fare better at first. A printed book in a dry, dark, stable room can survive without electricity. A clay tablet can survive almost absurdly long under the right conditions. Acidic paper in humid air may decay much faster. Leather bindings attract insects and fungi. Floods destroy basement archives. Roof leaks turn shelves into pulp. The great irony of the digital age becomes clear very quickly. The information that seemed least physical is among the most dependent on physical systems. A cloud is not a cloud. It is a building full of machines. Servers require electricity, cooling, replacement drives, network connections, software management, and people. Data centers may survive outages with generators for hours or days, sometimes longer if fuel systems are extensive. But nobody refills the tanks. Nobody swaps failed hardware. Nobody notices when cooling water stops flowing. Within a remarkably short time compared with the age of civilization, most of the living internet is gone. Not deleted in one grand event. Unreachable. Routers stop routing. Domain name infrastructure ceases to function coherently. Fiber links remain physically buried but carry no meaningful global conversation. Wireless towers go silent. Satellites may still transmit signals according to onboard programming, but ground networks fail beneath them. Videos, messages, photographs, scientific databases, financial records, software repositories, novels, music, personal diaries, and billions of ordinary conversations remain encoded on dead storage devices scattered across the planet. Some data could theoretically be recovered centuries later if the media survived and a technically capable reader knew how to reconstruct the hardware and encoding. But there is nobody to do that. The most sophisticated information system humans ever built dies not because its knowledge was erased, but because knowledge requires a chain of interpretation. Power, hardware, protocols, languages, context, people. Remove the final link, and trillions of files become patterns of charge and magnetism with no reader. Meanwhile, carved stone remains legible to no one, but continues existing anyway. This becomes a recurring theme of the empty earth. Simple things often outlast complicated ones. A stainless steel spoon may remain recognizable after the smartphone beside it has become useless corrosion and glass. A fired brick may survive after the building automation system that once managed 10,000 sensors has vanished without a trace anyone can use. A ceramic coffee cup can wait while a global computer network dies around it. Before 5 years pass, however, the abandoned world has to survive its first full turn through the seasons. Season matters enormously. In a hot summer, buildings designed around air conditioning become sealed boxes accumulating heat. Refrigeration is already gone. Asphalt softens in extreme temperatures. Dry vegetation grows around structures that nobody clears. Lightning still starts fires, but human ignition from vehicles, machinery, power lines under active operation, campfires, and arson has largely disappeared. Fire suppression disappears too. That does not mean every landscape suddenly burns more. Some may burn less often because people were the main source of ignition. Others may eventually burn larger or differently because nobody maintains fire breaks, conducts prescribed burns, removes fuel, or attacks a lightning fire while it is still small. In landscapes shaped for centuries or millennia by deliberate human burning, the disappearance of that practice changes vegetation itself, which then changes future fire. The first severe winter creates another test. Heating systems are dead. In cold climates, water left in pipes freezes and expands. Pipes split inside walls. When temperatures rise again, thawed water leaks through structures that no plumber will repair. Repeated freeze and thaw cycles widen cracks in concrete, stone, pavement, and masonry. Snow accumulates on roofs without anyone clearing unusual loads. Ice blocks drains. Road salt is no longer spread. Storm damage remains exactly where the storm leaves it. A building can therefore survive the disappearance of its occupants on the first day and suffer its most important injury months later, when a pipe ruptures behind a wall or ice opens a crack around a window. In warm, wet climates, a different clock dominates. Humidity feeds fungi. Termites and other decomposers attack vulnerable materials. Heavy rainfall repeatedly tests roofs and drainage systems. Tropical vegetation can exploit small openings quickly. In dry climates, biological decay may be slower, but ultraviolet light, dust, thermal expansion, and occasional flash floods continue working. The first year teaches the same lesson the first hour did. There is no universal countdown. Human absence does not press one button labeled decay. It removes maintenance, and then every climate chooses its own method. By 5 years, vegetation has become impossible to ignore in many cities. Road medians become thickets where moisture is sufficient. Vines climb facades. Trees establish in gutters, courtyards, vacant lots, roof gardens, rail corridors, and cracks in retaining walls. In tropical cities, the transformation can be aggressive and fast. In arid cities, dust and sun dominate, and vegetation advances only where water remains available. Artificial irrigation has ended, producing some surprising reversals. Cities that were green only because humans imported water begin losing trees and lawns. Reservoirs shrink in dry regions. Canals stop delivering mountain water across deserts. Golf courses brown and become scrub. Ornamental lakes evaporate or become marsh depending on inflow. In places like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Dubai, or other water-engineered landscapes, the absence of pumping reveals how much of the visible ecology was being held in place by energy. Elsewhere, drainage had been the artificial force. In the Netherlands, parts of the landscape depend on pumps, dikes, sluices, and continuous water management. The country would not vanish beneath the sea in one dramatic night, because the system contains passive structures and geography far more complicated than that. But without inspection, pumping, repair, and storm response, failures would accumulate. Low-lying polders could flood. Storms would exploit weak points. Water would redraw parts of the map over years and decades. New Orleans, similarly, would not simply become ocean the moment people disappeared, but a city whose low areas rely heavily on pumps and levees would be transformed by rainfall, subsidence, storms, and maintenance failure. Wetland and open water could eventually occupy places that once depended on active engineering to remain urban land. Venice would continue dealing with tides without movable barriers being actively operated and maintained. Coastal roads would disappear under repeated flooding. Salt would enter structures. Wooden piles and low oxygen mud may persist surprisingly well, while exposed masonry above them weathers. Every city begins revealing the argument it has been having with its landscape. In one city, the argument was with water. In another, heat. In another, landslides. In another, snow. In another, earthquakes. Humans were constantly negotiating those conditions through drains, retaining walls, pumps, air conditioning, seawalls, insulation, foundations, and repair crews. When the negotiators vanish, geology keeps its appointment. 10 years after the disappearance, the skyline is still visible in most major cities. But it looks abandoned even from far away. There is no smoke from ordinary industry. No aircraft trails cross the sky. No new buildings rise. Construction cranes remain fixed until corrosion, storms, or structural failure bring them down. Billboards bleach white. Flags tear away. Painted lines on roads fade. Vegetation hides lanes. Traffic lights hang dark, and some fall when cables and poles fail. A tree grows from what used to be a bus stop. A fox sleeps beneath a desk. Owls nest in a stadium. Rain falls through the roof of a shopping mall and creates a shallow seasonal pond across polished tile. The mall's escalators are frozen in place, their moving steps becoming a staircase no one uses. In the office tower, the window beside the coffee cup finally breaks during a storm. Wind enters the room. Papers lift from the floor and disappear into the street canyon below. Rain reaches the desk for the first time. The particle board swells. Metal fasteners begin rusting. The cup survives. For now, 20 years pass. A human generation, if any humans remain to measure it. The world is now old enough without us that the distinction between abandoned and ruined begins to matter. Abandoned means a thing still looks ready for its owner to return. Ruined means weather has become the owner. Most cities now contain both. A stone government building may still have intact walls while the lightweight commercial structure beside it has lost its roof. A parking garage may stand as a concrete skeleton wrapped in vines. Houses in damp climates sag inward after roof failures allowed rain to destroy timber frames. In deserts, wood may dry and split rather than rot quickly, and entire neighborhoods can remain eerily recognizable beneath blowing dust. Nothing has been cleaned for 2 decades. That sounds trivial until you consider what cleaning means at the scale of civilization. Leaves were removed from drains. Sediment was cleared from channels. Salt was washed from machinery. Paint was renewed before corrosion reached steel. Moss was removed from roofs. Trees were cut away from foundations. Termites were treated. Storm debris was hauled away. Cracks were sealed before winter. Maintenance was not merely cosmetic. It was a continuous war against chemistry, biology, and gravity. Now chemistry, biology, and gravity are winning without opposition. Bridges show the change clearly. A modern bridge is not just concrete and steel. It contains bearings, expansion joints, drainage systems, coatings, cables, bolts, welds, pavement, and foundations exposed to flowing water. Inspectors normally look for fatigue cracks, corrosion, scour, movement, and damage before those problems become catastrophic. Without inspection, some bridges fail early. A clogged drain lets water and road salt sit where they should not. Steel corrodes. A flood removes sediment around a pier. A freeze-thaw cycle widens damage. A cable strand snaps and is never replaced. Other bridges remain standing far longer than anyone expected. Structures contain margins of safety. Not every deterioration mechanism progresses quickly. Some environments are kind. Traffic loads vanished on the first day, removing one of the stresses bridges were designed to carry repeatedly. An empty bridge no longer endures millions of heavy trucks. That can extend life even as maintenance disappears. So the road network becomes a patchwork. Some crossings collapse into rivers. Others stand like useless monuments between roads that are no longer passable. Animals begin using the infrastructure differently from us. A highway is no longer a transportation system. It is an open strip through vegetation, sometimes warming faster in sunlight, sometimes channeling rain, sometimes offering easy movement until shrubs and trees close it. A tunnel becomes a cave. A culvert becomes a stream channel. A warehouse becomes a cliff-like nesting site. A rooftop becomes dry habitat above a young urban forest. Human architecture is converted into ecological structure, not intentionally, but organisms do not care what something was designed to be. A peregrine falcon already sees a skyscraper as a cliff while humans are present. Bats already use bridges as caves. Swallows already attach nests to concrete. Plants already colonize walls. After us, these opportunistic interpretations become the only interpretations that matter. By 30 or 40 years, some large metropolitan regions have experienced enough major storms, fires, freezes, floods, and vegetation growth that whole districts become difficult to recognize at street level. Trees obscure facades. Fallen utility poles disappear beneath undergrowth. Cars are rusted shells with vegetation growing through broken glass. Asphalt has fractured into islands. Manhole covers remain visible in places where roads around them are hidden. Rivers passing through cities begin changing course where embankments fail. Flood control channels fill with sediment and plants. Levees breach during exceptional water. Once water enters a district that had been kept dry artificially, each later flood may reinforce the new pathway. Some downtowns become wetlands. Others become woodland. Others remain dry ruins. The popular image of Manhattan turning into a forest is plausible as a broad direction in a humid temperate climate, but even there the result would be complicated. Central Park already supplies seed sources and habitat. Street trees spread where they can. Yet dense building foundations, contaminated soils, salt, altered drainage, and repeated coastal flooding create a mosaic rather than a single forest. Lower tunnels fill. Some waterfront structures fail. Storm surges push salt water farther into infrastructure. The rivers do not politely remain outside old property boundaries. On higher ground, vegetation thickens. The most vulnerable buildings lose floors after water weakens interior structures. Steel frames can remain standing after walls and floors have fallen away, creating enormous skeletal forms visible above trees. Far below, subway tunnels become dark aquatic passages. Water chemistry changes as rust, concrete, soil, sewage residues, and groundwater mix. Sediment accumulates. Some entrances collapse. Others remain as openings through which animals, roots, and water enter the former transit network. There is a temptation to imagine nature consuming civilization as though one side defeats the other. But by now the distinction has already blurred. A forest growing through a neighborhood contains lead in the soil from old paint and fuel. It contains fragments of glass and plastic. Its deer move around concrete foundations. Its streams pass through culverts. Its trees root in soil enriched or contaminated by centuries of human activity. This is not wilderness untouched by us. It is post-human ecology, and it will have its own winners and losers. Large animals often benefit from the disappearance of people, but population growth cannot continue forever. As deer increase, food becomes limiting. Predators expand if they can. Disease spreads more easily through dense populations. Harsh winters matter. Drought matters. Competition matters. The absence of humans does not remove death from nature. It removes one cause among many. In some regions, predator populations recover over decades. Wolves expand through former agricultural landscapes where persecution ended. Big cats recolonize territory if enough individuals survived and habitat corridors connect. Bears enter abandoned settlements and then, as human food disappears, depend increasingly on wild resources. The prey respond. Vegetation responds to the prey. Rivers respond to vegetation. Ecology is not a collection of independent population graphs. It is a set of relationships. Remove humans, and those relationships reorganize. Consider deer browsing young trees. If deer become extremely abundant before predators recover, forest regeneration may slow in some places. If wolves later reduce deer density or change where deer spend time, young trees may survive better. Beavers can expand into watersheds and build dams of their own, flooding roads and fields humans once drained. A beaver dam may appear upstream of a failed human dam. One was built with concrete, turbines, contracts, and engineering drawings. The other with teeth, mud, branches, and instinct. For a while they may exist in the same watershed. The landscape does not rank them by sophistication. Water simply responds to both. By 50 years, the first generation of many feral animals has never seen a human. This matters more than it sounds. Behavior can change within generations even without dramatic genetic evolution. Animals that once associated people with food, danger, shelter, or control no longer learn those relationships from parents. A dog born in year 49 does not miss a house. A pigeon born in year 50 has no concept of a train station full of commuters. A deer grazing beneath a collapsed billboard has no inherited memory of traffic. Humans are becoming ecologically historical. Our objects remain everywhere, but our behavior no longer shapes the daily decisions of living animals. The oceans are also quieter by now. Many commercial fish stocks have had decades without industrial harvest. Recovery varies dramatically because populations started in different conditions and ecosystems are changing under climate stress. Some rebound strongly. Others remain limited by habitat damage, warming water, acidification, pollution, or low remaining numbers. Whales may increase slowly because long-lived animals reproduce slowly. Sharks may recover where enough breeders remained. Seabirds may benefit from reduced bycatch but face changes in food webs and continuing invasive predators on nesting islands. Coral reefs are a sobering case. Stopping human activity removes fishing pressure and local pollution in many places, but ocean warming and acidification do not instantly vanish. Heat already stored in the climate system still matters. Reefs damaged before our disappearance may not simply rebuild into their former states, especially where temperatures remain unsuitable. The empty earth contains recovery without restoration. Those words are different. Recovery means life expands, adapts, and reorganizes. Restoration suggests a return to an earlier condition. Evolution rarely promises that. By the middle of the 1st century, human pollution has also followed divergent paths. Some air pollutants disappeared almost immediately when combustion stopped. Many rivers became clearer after industrial discharge and sewage inputs ended, but abandoned mines and contaminated sites continue leaking. Heavy metals do not biodegrade. Persistent organic pollutants can remain in soils and sediments. Microplastics fragment into smaller pieces. Landfills generate gases and leachate while liners and collection systems age. Oil spills occur in the first years from damaged facilities and ships. Over time, weathering, microbes, evaporation, burial, and dispersion alter them. Some contamination becomes localized in sediment for long periods. Chemical plants are now mostly ruins or silent tanks. Corrosion eventually opens containers that survived the first decades. Their contents enter soils, rivers, groundwater, or air depending on chemistry. Fires occasionally occur from lightning or spontaneous reactions. No one contains them, but no one continuously manufactures replacement chemicals either. The industrial pulse is finite. That is what distinguishes it from human civilization while we were here. Our systems produced pollution continuously. After our disappearance, they release what was already stored and then gradually exhaust themselves. A century after the final human moment, the balance has shifted decisively. There are no functioning national power grids. There are no operating factories in any meaningful sense. No cars move under their own power. No aircraft fly through the atmosphere. No ship intentionally crosses an ocean. Most small satellites in low orbits have either failed or, depending on altitude and design, begun the long fall toward re-entry as atmospheric drag lowers their paths. Some higher satellites remain aloft as dead machines. Geostationary spacecraft can persist far longer because the atmosphere does not drag them down from their distant orbits in the same way, though without station keeping they drift from their assigned positions. Earth now has a faint artificial ring of relics, not a continuous ring visible from the ground. A sparse swarm of silent objects, fragments, rocket bodies, and dead satellites, some of which may remain for very long periods. On the surface, many wooden houses have collapsed in humid climates. Steel roofs lie among trees. Brick chimneys survive after rooms around them disappear. Stone walls remain. Reinforced concrete structures vary wildly according to water exposure, construction quality, salt, freeze-thaw cycles, and reinforcement corrosion. The largest monuments still dominate their landscapes. Pyramids remain pyramids, though eroded. Massive stone temples and carved cliffs persist. Mount Rushmore changes slowly under weather because it is cut directly into granite, though geological time will eventually win there too. Huge open-pit mines remain wounds in topography. Road cuts remain visible across mountains. Quarries, canals, embankments, landfills, artificial islands, and reservoirs continue recording where human beings moved material on geological scales. And many dams are still standing. Others are not. Where dams failed, rivers have spent decades redistributing stored sediment. Former reservoirs become broad valleys crossed by new channels. Downstream deltas may receive sediment they were denied for generations. Coastlines respond. But coastlines are also responding to sea level change that humanity helped initiate before disappearing. For decades after emissions ended, ocean heat and ice sheet response continued interacting with the inherited climate state. Some coastal cities that were dry in year 1 are more frequently flooded in year 100. Without people, there are no seawalls being raised, no dunes restored, no pumps upgraded, and no buildings moved inland. The sea does not know those places were expensive. It occupies whatever elevation and geology permit. The office tower that held our coffee cup has survived longer than many structures around it, but not intact. Repeated windstorms stripped much of its glass. Rain entered floor after floor. Corrosion weakened connections. Interior walls vanished. Plants colonized lower levels where enough soil accumulated. Birds nested high in the frame. Then, in a storm sometime before the century mark, part of the upper structure failed. Floors fell into floors. The desk that held the cup disappeared in the collapse. The cup fell with concrete, steel, glass, office furniture, ceiling material, and decades of accumulated soil. It broke. This seems like the end of our little object. It is not. Several ceramic fragments are now buried beneath rubble. The tower is beginning to lose its shape. The cup has gained a better chance of surviving. 200 years after humanity disappears, the world would still contain places that look unmistakably human from a distance. A skyline may be broken, but not erased. A cathedral tower may rise above trees. A suspension bridge may have lost its roadway while portions of its towers remain. A highway interchange may still be visible from the air as a pale, looping geometry beneath vegetation. Desert cities may preserve street grids far more clearly than tropical ones. Yet the idea of a city has ended. A city is not simply buildings gathered together. It is an active concentration of energy and decision. Food moves in. Waste moves out. Water is redirected. Heat is produced. People repair one structure while demolishing another. Plants are encouraged in one square and cut down in the next. Laws determine where a road can go. Money determines which roof is replaced. Traffic patterns decide which bridge matters. Without that activity, the physical city becomes terrain. A former apartment block is no more inherently a home than a cliff is. It is shelter if an animal can use it, shade if a tree can grow beside it. a source of minerals if weather breaks it apart, a barrier if a stream must flow around it. The meaning has vanished before the material. This is true of borders too. National boundaries disappear almost instantly in practical terms. Fences remain for a while. Walls remain longer. Border roads and watchtowers remain as objects. But animals cross where openings appear. Rivers migrate across lines no government can defend. Forests spread according to rainfall, soil, fire, and seed rather than passports. The political map of Earth becomes irrelevant while the ecological map becomes more important. Mountain chains matter. Deserts matter. Ocean currents matter. Watersheds matter. Human borders mattered enormously to humans. Once there are no humans, they matter only where we physically altered the ground. This may be one of the strangest transformations of all. A boundary that once determined language, law, citizenship, currency, military power, and whether a person could cross a road becomes a rusting fence line in a field. Eventually the fence falls. The field remains. By 300 years, forest succession in suitable regions has matured. Trees that first colonized abandoned neighborhoods have themselves died and been replaced. The post-human forest is no longer a thin layer of greenery draped over ruins. In some places it has become a genuine multi-generational ecosystem, but traces of the old city still affect it. Concrete changes soil chemistry. Rubble creates drainage differences. Underground tunnels redirect groundwater. Buried pipes form cavities. Heavy metals influence which plants thrive. Old parks provide large trees and seed sources. Former streets create linear openings that alter light and wind. Even when buildings disappear from view, the city continues shaping the forest invisibly. Ecologists sometimes speak of legacy effects, consequences of past conditions that continue influencing a system after the original cause has disappeared. Human civilization would leave legacy effects on a planetary scale. The distribution of forests would reflect old agriculture. Animal ranges would reflect old roads and introductions. River channels would reflect old dams. Coastal wetlands would reflect old levees. Atmospheric carbon would reflect old combustion. The future would be full of ghosts that are not supernatural at all. They are simply causes whose effects lasted longer than the cause itself. At about this time scale, some of our most carefully engineered underground structures may still be surprisingly intact. Deep tunnels protected from weather can outlast exposed buildings. Mines remain as vast artificial voids until collapse or flooding transforms them. Salt mines can preserve objects under stable dry conditions. Deep geological repositories designed to isolate hazardous materials for extremely long periods may become some of the most deliberately durable human structures on Earth. This creates another irony. The things we most wanted future humans to forget physically, hazardous waste buried far underground, may be among the things built most carefully to persist without us. Meanwhile, many of the things we most wanted future humans to remember, websites, streaming libraries, social media archives, online photographs, may have become inaccessible in the first years. Durability is not the same as cultural importance. Civilization optimized different things for different goals. At 500 years, the great majority of ordinary surface buildings in wet climates are likely to be ruins rather than functioning shells. Roofs are gone. Floors have collapsed. Timber has returned to soil, been burned, or been consumed by fungi and insects. Steel has corroded extensively where exposed. Concrete persists in enormous quantities but is fractured, spalled, buried, and colonized. The largest masonry and stone structures remain more legible. Roman ruins have already shown us that stone, brick, and certain concretes can persist for millennia under favorable conditions even after roofs, furnishings, wooden elements, and daily maintenance vanish. Our future ruins would not follow identical paths, because modern structures use different materials and forms, but archaeology gives us a reminder that abandonment is not the same as immediate erasure. An empty Earth 5 centuries after us would therefore still look strangely familiar to an observer who knew what cities were. There would be forests with towers inside them, wetlands crossed by fragments of elevated highways, deserts containing fields of solar panels long since shattered by sand and thermal stress, wind turbines standing as rusted columns after blades failed, concrete airport runways visible as straight clearings where forest roots slowly break pavement, ports choked with sediment and wrecked vessels, container yards where steel boxes collapsed into reddish layers, railways visible as unusually straight embankments even where rails have rusted away or been buried. Power transmission corridors may remain as broad lines of different age vegetation long after towers fall, because their original clearing changed forest succession. At sea, shipwrecks become reefs. Some sink during the first days and weeks. Others drift until weather, corrosion, grounding, or collision ends them. Large steel vessels eventually rust and collapse, but while they persist underwater, they offer hard surfaces and cavities for marine organisms. Human transportation becomes habitat. Airplanes become aluminum-rich wreck sites. Cars become iron-rich patches in soil. Buildings become artificial cliffs. Landfills become strange hills. The physical distinction between artifact and geology gradually weakens. And high above all of this, some of our spacecraft continue farther than anything on Earth. Low Earth orbit satellites feel the faint upper atmosphere. Molecular collisions steal tiny amounts of orbital energy. Depending on altitude, shape, solar activity, and other factors, their orbits decay over years, decades, or longer until they enter denser air and re-enter. Many burn almost completely. Some fragments reach the surface or ocean. Higher objects can persist dramatically longer. Navigation satellites in medium Earth orbit occupy regions where atmospheric drag is negligible. Geostationary satellites roughly 36,000 kilometers above the equator do not simply fall after their batteries die. Without station keeping, their orbits drift and tilt. They stop being useful communications platforms, but they remain artifacts moving through space. Beyond Earth orbit, the contrast becomes extraordinary. Hardware left on the moon sits in an environment with no rain, rivers, forests, or oxygen-rich atmosphere. Micrometeorites, radiation, thermal cycling, and lunar dust slowly alter it, but there is no weather like Earth's to erase tracks quickly. Human footprints on the moon may outlast entire terrestrial cities. The descent stages of lunar modules, rovers, instruments, and discarded equipment become among humanity's longest-lasting recognizable objects. Farther away, probes continue through the solar system or beyond it. Voyager does not require human civilization to keep moving. It will eventually go silent when power falls too low and instruments can no longer operate, but silence is not stopping. Momentum carries it onward through interstellar space. If every building on Earth becomes sediment, some human machines will still be traveling between stars. This gives our disappearance an unexpected spatial dimension. Humanity would end on Earth in one instant, but our material future would become scattered across enormous distances. A ceramic fragment under a collapsed office tower. A plutonium-powered probe crossing darkness. A boot print on the moon. A layer of plastic in ocean sediment. A granite face carved into a mountain. A chicken bone becoming fossilized in landfill material. There would be no one object that represents us. There never was. By 1,000 years, most climates have passed through enough storms, floods, droughts, fires, freezes, plant succession, corrosion, and biological activity that the ordinary human world is deeply buried or broken. This is where our imagination often makes a mistake. We picture 1,000 years as simply 10 centuries of the same process. But landscapes can reorganize suddenly. One flood can move more sediment than decades of normal river flow. One hurricane can remove a roof that survived 400 quiet years. One wildfire can transform a mature forest growing through a suburb. One landslide can bury an entire district. One earthquake can finish towers that corrosion weakened slowly. Time does not erase civilization at a steady speed. It stores vulnerability and then occasionally releases it all at once. By now, many dams that survived the first centuries have failed, but again, not necessarily every massive structure. Some gravity dams may remain as broken or partially functioning walls. Some reservoirs may still exist behind barriers altered by sediment and erosion. Others have become valleys whose rivers cut through huge wedges of deposited mud. Former artificial lakes leave ecological signatures long after the water level falls. Fine sediments remain on valley floors. Shoreline terraces mark old levels. Tree species establish according to newly exposed soils. The river may wander across sediment that was once underwater for a century or more. Beavers, landslides, glaciers in colder regions, and ordinary river dynamics create new dams and destroy them again. Human hydrology merges back into natural hydrology, but never by undoing the past. The atmosphere, too, continues its long response. 1,000 years without fossil fuel emissions does not mean every extra molecule of human-released carbon has vanished. The carbon cycle has redistributed enormous amounts among atmosphere, ocean, vegetation, soils, and sediments. Temperatures and sea level have followed pathways shaped by the concentration at which emissions stopped, the response of ice sheets, ocean circulation, vegetation, and feedbacks. The short-lived pollution of industry is ancient history. The carbon pulse is not. Some consequences of human climate change are measured in longer units than civilization itself. That fact feels almost paradoxical. The factories that produce the gases may disappear before the climatic consequences of those gases do. Cause becomes ruin. Effect remains active. The same is true of extinction. No amount of forest regrowth resurrects a species whose last individual died before humanity vanished. Passenger pigeons do not refill the sky. Great auks do not return to northern islands. Thylacines do not step out of Tasmanian forest because the roads are empty. Evolution may eventually create new species that occupy similar ecological roles, but they will not be the old species returned. The empty earth therefore becomes richer in some ways and permanently poorer in others. Nature's resilience is enormous. Nature's memory is also enormous. These truths can coexist. Our ceramic fragment remains beneath the former office tower. At 1,000 years, it has no story anyone can tell. The building above it is largely unrecognizable as architecture. Sediment has accumulated. Roots moved through cracks. Rubble settled. Perhaps a stream created by altered drainage occasionally crosses the site. The cup fragment is simply a hard, chemically unusual piece among millions of other fragments. But it has already outlived the company that bought it, the person who drank from it, the computer that sat beside it, the electrical grid that powered the building, the network that connected the computer, the economic system that paid for all of them, and the language in which someone once said they would be back after lunch. No one came back. Time did. 10,000 years is long enough that recorded human history would fit inside it with room to spare. If you could stand on Earth at that distance from our final day, you would not walk through a global museum of recognizable modern cities. You would walk through landscapes. Some of those landscapes would contain ruins obvious even to an untrained eye. Massive stonework can be extraordinarily persistent. Foundations cut into bedrock can survive after everything built above them disappears. Earthworks can remain as subtle shapes. Deep quarries and mines may still look unnatural. Tunnels may survive as collapsed voids or drainage pathways. But most ordinary neighborhoods would have become archaeology beneath soil, vegetation, sediment, dunes, marsh, or coastal water. A person from our time transported there would sometimes know where a city had been only because of geometry. A ridge too straight, a terrace at an improbable elevation, a concentration of brick fragments, a buried layer of asphalt, a line of concrete foundations crossing woodland, a river whose valley contains sediments trapped for centuries behind a dam that no longer exists. At former coastal cities, sea level change may have moved the shoreline kilometers relative to old streets. Some districts lie under estuaries or shallow sea. Others stand inland because sediment built outward or local uplift changed the coast. The map is no longer ours. Continents still resemble the ones we knew because plate tectonics moves slowly on this timescale. Mountains and major rivers remain broadly familiar. But coastlines, forests, wetlands, and local channels have changed repeatedly. Humanity's great confidence in fixed addresses begins looking charmingly temporary. An address was always a coordinate on moving geology. 10,000 years also gives evolution time to begin making our domesticated descendants visibly different. Not necessarily spectacularly different, because major evolutionary transformations depend on generation time, selection, population isolation, and chance. But thousands of generations for rodents, insects, and many small animals can be powerful. Even large mammals have experienced sustained natural selection for many generations. The surviving descendants of domestic dogs are now shaped almost entirely by regional environments. In one climate, medium-sized endurance hunters may dominate. Elsewhere, smaller scavenging generalists succeed. On islands, body size might shift in unexpected directions. Populations isolated by geography begin diverging genetically. They are no longer breeds. A breed is a human cultural category maintained by controlled reproduction. They are populations becoming whatever ecology allows. Feral pigs have also been reshaped. In some regions, their descendants resemble robust wild boar-like forms, though evolution does not literally reverse them into an ancestral species. Natural selection favors survival traits rather than pedigree. Horses occupy open landscapes where forage and water permit. Goats persist in rugged terrain. Some cattle lineages survive where disease, predation, climate, and reproduction allow. Others vanished long ago. Cats remain formidable predators in many places, but their future depends heavily on prey and competition. Without houses providing shelter, veterinary medicine, and human food, selection favors animals capable of living entirely within local ecosystems. Human-associated species that seemed universal may have become rare or extinct. The house mouse could survive widely because it is flexible, but populations no longer receive grain shipments linking continents. The brown rat persists in many places, but not necessarily at the astronomical densities supported by human waste. Pigeons continue in rocky habitats and cliffs that resemble the ancestral environments from which urban pigeons came. Some organisms disappear because humans were their habitat. Others are released because humans were their limiting factor. And some new relationships arise that never existed while we were present. Perhaps a descendant of feral dogs becomes an important predator of deer in a region where wolves never recolonized. Perhaps feral cattle maintain open grassland that otherwise would have become forest. Perhaps former ornamental plants hybridize with wild relatives and become permanent parts of local flora. Perhaps a non-native tree introduced centuries before human disappearance becomes dominant across an entire watershed. The biological legacy of civilization becomes evolution. At this point, it is no longer meaningful to ask which organisms are natural and which are human introductions, as though the distinction controls their future. History determined how they arrived. Ecology determines whether they remain. 10,000 years is also long enough for many plastics to lose the form in which humans recognize them. A plastic bottle exposed to sunlight and weather does not remain a pristine bottle for 10 millennia. It cracks, embrittles, fragments, abrades, becomes fouled by organisms, moves through rivers, sinks into sediment, burns in fires, or is chemically altered. But disappearing as a bottle is not the same as disappearing chemically. Microplastic particles, altered polymers, additives, combustion products, and buried plastic-rich layers can persist as part of sediments. Some plastics may be broken down biologically or chemically more than others. Some are protected from sunlight and oxygen after burial. Future geology receives our plastic not as mountains of intact shopping bags, but as a complicated chemical and physical signature. Concrete follows another path. Humanity manufactured it on a planetary scale. Over thousands of years, buildings fracture and concrete becomes rubble and sediment. Carbonation changes its chemistry. Minerals react with groundwater. Yet enormous quantities of artificial stone do not simply cease to exist. Fragments become incorporated into soils, river deposits, coastal sediments, and urban archaeological layers. Brick, glass, ceramics, slag, asphalt, aluminum, steel corrosion products, fly ash, and synthetic materials mix with ordinary sediment. We created a new kind of rock-forming environment without intending to. Landfills may preserve some of the clearest sections. A modern landfill is a bizarre sedimentary deposit. Compressed food waste, paper, plastic, metal, glass, textiles, construction debris, electronics, batteries, and millions of manufactured objects placed together far faster than most natural sediments accumulate. After closure systems fail and coverings erode, parts may be redistributed. Other sections become buried deeply enough to persist. Future erosion could expose a layer containing thousands of identical objects. To a hypothetical geologist, the pattern might be more informative than any monument. Nature rarely deposits millions of toothbrushes in one horizon. The chemical record is even stranger. Human nuclear weapons testing spread artificial radionuclides globally. Many isotopes decay away on timescales too short to last for deep geological ages, while others persist longer. Industrial combustion left distinctive particles such as fly ash and spheroidal carbonaceous particles in sediments. Fossil fuel burning altered carbon isotope ratios. Agriculture radically changed nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. Mining moved metals from concentrated ores into broad environmental circulation. Even if no recognizable city survives, a thin layer in future sediment can still say, something happened here. Not in words. In chemistry, the oceans accumulate part of the message. Sediment settles on continental shelves and deep basins. Microplastics and industrial particles become mixed with shells, clay, organic matter, volcanic ash, and dust. Extinction patterns appear in fossil assemblages. Species transported by humans show up suddenly in places where they had no earlier record. Chicken bones, cattle bones, pig bones, and human bones are not guaranteed to fossilize everywhere, of course. Fossilization is rare and selective. But humanity raised certain domestic animals in such enormous abundance and spread them so widely that their remains have an unusual chance of contributing to the biological signature of our era. The mass pattern matters. So does absence. A future fossil record would show numerous species declining or disappearing unusually quickly around the time human activity intensified. Habitat changes, invasive species, hunting, pollution, and climate change all leave different but overlapping signals. The event would not look like the asteroid boundary that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs, but it could still look geologically abrupt. Then, at the top of that strange interval, one additional signal would appear. Human activity stops. Industrial soot deposition collapses. New plastic production ends. Mining ends. Fishing pressure ends. Fossil fuel emissions fall almost to zero in an instant. Agricultural pollen patterns change as cropland succeeds to other vegetation. Domesticated animal populations crash, redistribute, and evolve. The human geological signal does not fade gradually because humanity chose to transition over centuries. It ends like a line cut with a knife. A future scientist with no knowledge of US might find that transition deeply puzzling. For thousands of years, one species appears to have altered sediment, chemistry, extinction rates, carbon cycling, river systems, and the global distribution of organisms at extraordinary speed. Then its direct activity simply stops. No declining industrial phase. No gradual technological retreat. No clear environmental catastrophe large enough to kill only that species everywhere at once. The final layer of human artifacts would contain unfinished, ordinary life. Meals still in containers. Vehicles left on roads. Factories halted mid-process. Ships lost at sea. Buildings full of personal objects. If our hypothetical future scientist could reconstruct enough detail, the disappearance would look as mysterious to them as it does to us tonight. Why did the builders stop? Why did every settlement become empty at the same moment? Why was there no recovery? They could read the evidence, but not the cause. Our thought experiment contains no cause. That is part of what makes it useful. We remove humans from the equation without adding an asteroid, pandemic, war, or environmental disaster that would independently reshape Earth. Then we watch which changes belong specifically to our absence. At 100,000 years, the surviving evidence has become even more selective. 100,000 years is longer than Homo sapiens has practiced agriculture by an enormous margin. It is long enough for climate cycles, erosion, sedimentation, and evolution to alter the planet profoundly. Some human structures cut into stable rock might still be detectable. Deep mines remain geological anomalies. Tunnels may be collapsed but traceable. Nuclear waste repositories may retain engineered barriers or chemical signatures depending on geology and design. Large earthworks can persist as altered stratigraphy even when surface shape is muted. Most exposed metal objects are gone as recognizable objects. Steel has returned to oxides and minerals. Aluminum, though corrosion-resistant in certain conditions, is dispersed, buried, or chemically changed. Glass survives in fragments, but weathers. Ceramics remain among the more stubborn, ordinary materials. Our coffee cup fragment may still exist if it happened to be buried in a stable environment. Perhaps the former city was covered by river sediment after channels shifted. Perhaps sea level rose and the site became an estuary, adding mud above the rubble. Perhaps tectonic subsidence lowered the area slowly. The fragment no longer lies beneath a tower because there is no tower. It lies inside a layer. A tiny piece of fired clay in a sedimentary story. The skyscraper has become geology around the cup. This is the reversal our buildings never seem to imagine. We build with rock and metal extracted from geology. Given enough time, geology takes the building back. At 100,000 years, the climate still carries consequences of the carbon pulse in ways that depend on how much carbon humanity had emitted before disappearing and how Earth system feedbacks unfolded afterward. Much of the excess carbon has moved from atmosphere into oceans, soils, vegetation, and geological reservoirs. But the perturbation of the carbon cycle is not equivalent to an ordinary short weather event. Ice sheets may have advanced or retreated according to long-term orbital forcing and greenhouse gas concentrations. Sea level may be dramatically different from the day humans vanished. Former coastal cities may be far offshore or far inland relative to new coastlines. Glaciers may have ground across some northern ruins. pulverizing structures and carrying fragments into moraines. Deserts may have shifted. Forests may occupy regions that were once grassland, while fires, herbivores, climate, and soil maintain open landscapes elsewhere. No one is steering any of it. But this does not mean Earth has become static. A planet without humans is not a planet without change. It may be more accurate to say the opposite. Human beings often tried to keep particular places from changing. We fixed rivers behind levees, held slopes with retaining walls, protected coasts with barriers, irrigated dry land, drained wetland, suppressed fire, cleared forests, maintained grass where shrubs wanted to grow. Once those local controls disappear, the planet becomes more visibly dynamic. The world moves. And by now, no living organism remembers that it ever had to move around us. 1 million years after the disappearance, the world has moved beyond ruin. Ruins belong to memory. At 1 million years, most of our surface civilization belongs to stratigraphy. 1 million years is not especially long to a planet, but it is enormous compared with the lifespan of concrete buildings, steel bridges, national borders, corporations, languages, and nearly every institution humans considered durable. Plate tectonics has moved continents by distances measured in kilometers or tens of kilometers, depending on location. Rivers have abandoned old valleys and cut new ones. Volcanoes have covered some landscapes with lava and ash. Erosion has removed hillsides. Sedimentary basins have buried old surfaces beneath thick deposits. Coastlines have shifted repeatedly. No modern city remains recognizable as a skyline. The skyline was always one of the most temporary parts. What remains is below. In favorable sedimentary settings, future erosion may expose a compressed layer containing concrete fragments, glass, ceramics, metal-rich minerals, plastic-derived materials, combustion particles, unusual chemical ratios, and fossil remains of organisms that humans spread in extraordinary abundance. Elsewhere, the record has been erased by erosion or metamorphosed beyond recognition. Geology is selective. This is why the question, what would survive humanity, has no single answer. Survival depends on where something ends up. A paper document sealed in an ordinary office is fragile. A piece of ceramic buried quickly in oxygen-poor sediment is less so. A city on an eroding mountain front may disappear almost completely. A landfill buried in a subsiding sedimentary basin may leave a remarkable technofossil deposit. A footprint on Earth washes away. A footprint on the Moon may persist incomparably longer. At 1 million years, some lunar artifacts may still be physically recognizable, though battered by micrometeorites and radiation. There is no liquid water cycling through cracks, no roots, no wind-driven sandstorm in an atmosphere, no oxygen-rich rain corroding structures as on Earth. The Moon becomes an accidental museum without visitors. Far beyond it, interstellar probes continue on trajectories that no longer have mission controllers. Their electronics are dead. Their power sources are exhausted. Their surfaces are altered by radiation and dust impacts. Yet as objects they persist, moving through regions where collisions are rare. It is possible that the longest-lived recognizable human artifacts are not on the planet where humans evolved. That thought carries a peculiar loneliness. Earth erases us because Earth is alive with processes. Space preserves us because space is mostly empty. But even on Earth, biology has not merely filled the gap we left. It has evolved through it. 1 million years can produce substantial divergence in isolated populations. Many species present on the last human day are extinct for entirely ordinary evolutionary reasons. Others have split into descendants that would look unfamiliar to us. Climate changed. Competitors changed. Predators changed. Continents continued shifting. Diseases emerged. Chance events redirected lineages. The descendants of domestic species, if they survive this long, are no longer meaningfully domestic. There is no evolutionary memory of leashes, barns, selective breeding registries, milking machines, feedlots, or veterinary clinics. There are simply animals whose distant ancestors once lived with humans. Perhaps future canids descended partly from dogs occupying niches across several continents. Perhaps feral pigs produced distinct island species. Perhaps horse descendants changed body size as climates and habitats shifted. Perhaps a lineage of urban-adapted birds used the empty cities for a few thousand years and then followed the cities into extinction when those structures vanished. Perhaps some organisms that benefited from our disappearance flourish for hundreds of thousands of years and then disappear during a later climate transition. There is no final ecological state called nature recovered. There is only continuing evolution. That may be the central biological lesson of the entire thought experiment. When humans vanish, Earth does not heal toward a target. It changes away from us. The distinction matters. Healing is a human metaphor. It suggests there is one correct previous condition to which a system should return. Ecosystems are historical. After disturbance, they can recover function, complexity, biomass, and biodiversity, but they do so with the species, climate, soils, and geography available at that moment. An old-growth forest may eventually occupy an abandoned industrial region, but it is not necessarily the same forest that occupied the land before the factory was built. Some species are missing. Others were introduced. Soil chemistry changed. Climate changed. Rivers changed. The new forest is real. It does not need to be ancient to count as nature. The same is true of the whole planet. By 1 million years, the human-free biosphere is not waiting for us. It has no concept of us. If a highly intelligent lineage has evolved by then, it would not necessarily know that another technological species once existed. Intelligence is not guaranteed to evolve quickly after ours, or at all. Natural selection does not aim towards civilization. But suppose, only for a moment, that some future species becomes capable of geology. Perhaps it is descended from an animal living today. Perhaps from a lineage that does not yet exist. Perhaps its sensory world is so different from ours that we would struggle to recognize its intelligence. It begins studying unusual layers in rock. It finds concentrations of refined metals where natural processes rarely place them. It finds glassy particles, concrete-like fragments, and unfamiliar polymers or their alteration products. It notices a sudden global redistribution of species in the recent geological past. It sees evidence of rapid carbon cycle disruption. It finds an extinction pulse. It finds tunnels. It finds a mine. And perhaps, in one unusually protected deposit, it finds something unmistakably artificial. A ceramic fragment with a curved surface. Part of a cup. The object has no label now. The logo painted on it vanished long ago. The glaze is weathered. The handle is gone. Most of the vessel is missing. But symmetry can be evidence. Material composition can be evidence. Context can be evidence. The hypothetical geologist recognizes that the fragment was made. Not grown. Not crystallized naturally. Made. Suddenly the strange layer has an author. Not a name. Not a face. A category. Someone was here. This future scientist could spend generations reconstructing us from rubbish and chemistry without ever knowing a single human story. They might know that we burned ancient carbon before they know why. They might know we raised chickens before they know we wrote poetry. They might know we built cities before they know we loved them. They might know we split atoms before they know we were afraid of death. Geology preserves behavior more readily than meaning. That may be one of the saddest and most beautiful facts in the scenario. The parts of civilization we considered most important were often intangible. Friendship leaves almost no fossil. Humor leaves almost no isotope. A lullaby changes no river channel. A promise made beside a hospital bed is not preserved in concrete. The geological record would reveal that humans were powerful. it would not automatically reveal what it felt like to be human. 10 million years after our disappearance, even this geological detective work becomes harder. Sediments that preserve our layer may have hardened into rock. Others have been eroded and redeposited. Tectonic movement has deformed some deposits. Chemical alteration has transformed materials. Many synthetic compounds have long since broken down or become new minerals. But abrupt anomalies can persist. Geologists routinely reconstruct events hundreds of millions of years old from traces far subtler than a city. A thin clay layer can reveal an asteroid impact. A change in carbon isotopes can reveal a disruption of the global carbon cycle. A shift in fossils can reveal an extinction. An ash bed can date an eruption. Human civilization created signals at global scale. Even when individual artifacts vanish, pattern can survive. The final human day might therefore remain detectable long after the last recognizable skyscraper disappears. Not because our absence itself leaves a magic marker, but because the extraordinary activity before it ends abruptly. Imagine a graph drawn by a future geologist. Industrial combustion particles rise sharply, then fall to almost nothing. Certain radionuclides appear suddenly, then decay. Plastic-derived particles rise, then stop receiving new material. Domestic animal remains surge, then crash and reorganize. Pollen from cultivated crops gives way to succession vegetation. Sedimentation patterns change as dams fail and agriculture ends. The line does not taper gently. It breaks. The future geologist may never know why. 50 million years after us, the continents are recognizably the same only in the broadest sense. Ocean basins have changed. Mountain belts have risen and eroded. Rivers that seemed permanent are gone. New species dominate ecosystems. Almost every species alive on our final day is likely extinct or radically transformed through descendants, because 50 million years is an immense span of evolutionary time. For comparison, the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared about 66 million years before the world in which we are speaking tonight. At 50 million years after humans, our civilization would be almost as deep in the future as Tyrannosaurus is deep in our past. That comparison changes the scale of the question. When we ask what if humans disappeared, we often imagine deer in a shopping mall after 20 years. But Earth does not stop at 20 years. Eventually, the shopping mall is as gone as a dinosaur nest. Eventually, New York is a geological locality. Eventually, London, Tokyo, Lagos, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Cairo, Beijing, Los Angeles, Mexico City, Madrid, Jakarta, and every other human settlement are names that exist nowhere because names require minds. Eventually, our languages have no speakers, our songs no listeners, our money no value, our laws no subjects, our flags no nations, our clocks no appointments. The planet does not become empty. Only human meaning becomes empty. Life continues filling the space with meanings we cannot imagine because they would belong to other organisms, if meaning in the human sense belongs to them at all. A forest does not know it grows over a courtroom. A river does not know it crosses a border. A whale does not know shipping lanes have vanished. A fox does not know the concrete cavity it sleeps in was once a bank vault. The future does not misunderstand our world. It simply has no need to understand it. And still, scattered through rocks, our brief presence remains measurable. At that distance, it is tempting to say that nature has erased us. But even that is too simple. Earth does not return to a condition that existed before humans. It carries forward a mixed inheritance: altered river valleys, redistributed species, changed soils, extinction gaps, industrial chemistry, carbon that moved through atmosphere and ocean, buried materials, and a scattering of objects beyond Earth itself. And the word nature becomes slightly misleading if it suggests that cities were ever places from which nature had been excluded. Rain was already striking rooftops. Bacteria were already living in water pipes. Pigeons nested beneath bridges. Tree roots pressed against sidewalks. Fungi entered walls. Gravity loaded every beam. Weather attacked steel. Humans themselves were organisms inside the same system. When people disappear, nature does not suddenly enter the city. One unusually powerful participant leaves, and everything else begins responding to the space, energy, food, barriers, chemicals, and structures that participant left behind. That is why the ordinary coffee cup has been useful to keep with us. We could have followed a pyramid, a dam, or a reactor, objects built to seem important. Instead, we followed something almost invisible in daily life. A cup exists because minerals were extracted, clay was processed, kilns were built, fuel or electricity supplied, factories maintained, roads and ships operated, shops stocked, water treated, and someone finally filled the finished object with coffee. Its simplicity hides an enormous network. When that network disappears, the cup remains. For a while, the same is true of nearly everything around a person today. A blanket, a lamp, a window, a glass of water, a printed book. Each looks like a single object only because the thousands of earlier actions behind it have become invisible. Without people, those objects begin separating from their purposes. The blanket becomes fibers. The lamp becomes metal, glass, plastic, and corrosion. The book becomes paper, mold, fragments, carbon, perhaps soil. The cup becomes ceramic beneath sediment. Civilization does not vanish in the order humans would rank its achievements. A cathedral may disappear while a landfill leaves a clearer geological signal. A digital masterpiece may become unreadable while fragments of disposable material remain detectable. A spacecraft may continue moving after every institution that built it has disappeared. A mark on the moon may persist while the city that sent the astronaut there has become geology. Durability and importance turn out to be completely different things. There is also a difference between an object surviving and a system surviving. A bridge can remain standing after the transportation network it belonged to has ceased to exist. A server can preserve bits after the protocols, power, and readers required to interpret them are gone. A reservoir can remain behind a dam after the water management system that once decided when to release it has vanished. A clock can keep ticking after there is nobody left who needs to know the hour. That distinction matters because civilization is made less from isolated objects than from relationships between objects, people, institutions, energy, knowledge, and maintenance. Those relationships disappear much faster than stone, ceramic, or metal. And before we return to the warm cup on the desk where this story began, one smaller clock is still running inside our enormous one. What would be the last human machine to stop moving? There is probably no answer we could identify in advance. Some machines would stop within seconds because human hands were part of their control loop. Others would operate until grid power vanished. Emergency systems would continue on batteries or generators. Solar-powered devices might wake each morning for years if their electronics, panels, and storage survived. Remote weather instruments could keep taking measurements that nobody receives. Automatic lighthouse equipment might flash until power systems failed. A mechanical device moved by water or wind could continue long after its purpose disappeared. Satellites would orbit after they stopped functioning. Clock mechanisms might stop while planetary motion continued, keeping the only time that mattered physically. Eventually, there would be no useful distinction between a machine still performing its intended task and an object merely moving because physics acts on it. A dead wind turbine can rotate in a storm. A fallen door can swing in wind. A satellite can orbit with no electronics alive. Voyager can cross interstellar space after its transmitter is silent. Is it still a machine when no mind expects anything from it? That is less an engineering question than a philosophical one. The answer does not matter to the object. After enough time, the final active electronic circuit built by humans fails somewhere with no witness. There is no last technician to write down the time. No message appears saying civilization has now fully shut down. A voltage falls below a threshold. A transistor stops switching. And one final little island of intentional human function becomes ordinary matter following ordinary physics. Perhaps it happens years after the disappearance. Perhaps some simple autonomous device survives much longer. We cannot know which one would win the accidental competition. But eventually, there is a moment when no machine on Earth is still doing what humans designed it to do. The planet does not become quieter at that exact second. Birds are calling. Wind moves branches. Waves strike coasts. Thunder crosses an empty plain. Ice cracks. Animals breathe. Rivers carry stones. The world was never dependent on machine noise for sound. It simply becomes a soundscape without intention. No alarm means danger. No bell means an hour. No siren means move aside. No ringtone means someone is calling. Sound still fills the air. Meaning has changed. Now, after traveling millions of years into this imaginary future, we can return one final time to the office where our story began. Not the ruined office. The real one, before anyone vanished. The coffee is still warm. The computer is still glowing. Outside the window, traffic moves through the street. Somewhere beneath the building, pumps are removing water. Far away, grid operators are balancing electricity. A technician is inspecting a transformer. Someone is testing water quality. Someone is repairing a bridge joint. Someone is feeding an animal in a conservation center. Someone is monitoring a reactor. Someone is backing up an archive. Someone is clearing a storm drain. Someone is measuring the health of a forest. Most of them will never know one another. Yet together their work is part of what makes the ordinary scene ordinary. The person who owns the cup returns to the desk. They do not know we have just watched the cup fall through a ruined tower, become buried, and wait in sediment for 1,000,000 years. To them it is still Monday. They pick it up. The coffee has cooled a little. They take a sip. Outside, a bus stops at the corner. Someone opens a shop. A pedestrian waits for the signal. An airplane crosses high above the city. Nothing extraordinary happens. And perhaps after imagining a world in which all of that disappears, nothing extraordinary happening feels extraordinary enough. We do not need to turn this thought experiment into a warning or a lesson carved in stone. It can remain what it is, a way of changing scale. For one night, we watched civilization lose power in hours, lose maintenance in days, lose recognizable order in decades, lose most of its architecture in centuries and millennia, and become a geological signature over deep time. We watched forests return without becoming the forests of the past. We watched animals benefit from our absence and suffer from it. We watched rivers outlast dams, chemistry outlast factories, extinctions outlast memory, and a simple ceramic fragment outlast an enormous network that once gave it meaning. And after all of that, the strangest part may be the present moment. Because tonight the pumps are still running. The lights are still coming on somewhere as night crosses the planet. The internet is still carrying human voices. Ships are still changing course deliberately. Aircraft are still landing. People are still opening gates for animals that depend on them. Books are still being repaired in archives. Bridges are still being inspected. Trees are still being planted and cut and studied and protected and sometimes neglected. The world is still complicated by us, and we are still complicated by the world. There is no empty city tonight, only the imagined one, receding now into the distance. You can let its dark towers soften at the edge of thought. Let the vines move quietly over the walls. Let rain fill the abandoned streets. Let rivers find their paths. Let forests grow where climate allows them and grasslands remain open where fire and grazing shape them. Let coastlines move. Let bridges fall when their time comes. Let satellites trace silent arcs overhead. You do not have to follow the story all the way to the buried layer again. We have already been there. We know the cup survives for a while. We know the tower does not. We know the planet keeps turning. And now, here in the world where people are still present, you can allow the scale to become smaller again. Not millions of years. Not 10,000. Not a century. Just tonight. The room around you does not need to survive geological time. The objects near you do not need to become fossils. Nothing needs to prove permanence before it can matter. In fact, almost nothing that matters to a human life is permanent. A conversation ends. A season changes. A house is repaired and repaired again. A tree grows, loses leaves, grows new ones. Cities alter from generation to generation. People arrive and leave. The temporary nature of civilization is not a reason to dismiss it. Temporariness is the condition under which civilization exists at all. A garden matters because someone tends it, not because it will remain unchanged for 1,000,000 years. A bridge matters because someone crosses it, not because steel can defeat geology forever. A library matters because someone reads what it protects. A cup matters because someone holds it. And tonight, somewhere on Earth, billions of ordinary human actions continue happening, maintaining a world that appears stable only because so many things are continually being done. You do not need to maintain any of them right now. The grid has operators. The water system has workers. The night has people awake in control rooms, hospitals, ports, power stations, laboratories, kitchens, fire stations, farms, and places we rarely think about. Other people are asleep already. Soon, perhaps, you will be too. So allow the imagined empty earth to keep moving without your attention. Let the first lights go dark. Let the streets become quiet. Let the seasons pass faster now. Grass through cracks, trees above roofs, water below streets, birds through broken windows. A century, 1,000 years. Sediment over stone. The slow chemistry of time. Far above, a silent spacecraft continues outward. Far below, a fragment of ceramic rests where a city once stood. Neither knows what it represents. Neither needs to. The meaning belonged to us. And for tonight, we are still here to give things meaning. Let your breathing become a little slower now. Let the enormous timescales move beyond the edge of what you need to hold in your mind. No city needs to collapse tonight. No dam needs to fail. No forest needs to reclaim anything. Those were paths through an imagined future, useful because they let us see the present from very far away. Now the distance can close. The planet beneath you is turning at the same steady pace it kept throughout our entire journey. It turned before cities. It would turn after them. And it turns tonight while people sleep inside them. Outside, there may be traffic or wind, rain or silence, streetlights or darkness. Somewhere there are waves arriving on a coast. Somewhere snow is falling on a road. Somewhere an animal is moving through a forest that humans protect. Somewhere another animal is moving through a city humans built. All of them belong to the same planet. And you do too. So let the hypothetical fade now. Let the empty office fill again. Let the cup remain on the desk. Let the elevator doors open. Let the traffic light change. Let the city breathe in its ordinary mechanical and biological way. There will be time for another enormous question another night. For now, there is no need to imagine the last human machine, the last standing tower, or the final trace in stone. There is only the present world, temporary and active, continuing around you. And there is rest. Sleep well. And when morning comes, if you happen to notice a road being repaired, a tree growing through a crack, a bridge crossing a river, a bird sitting on a traffic light, or simply a cup cooling beside a window, perhaps it will look very slightly different. Not because it became more permanent, because you remembered that it never was. Good night.